Hello and welcome to the COMMnections webinar series, brought to you by the Master of Arts in Communication program and the Johns Hopkins University Office of Advanced Academic Programs. Today's event features a discussion on content analysis using automated platforms with Don Thompson. My name is Natalie Koss and I'm the event producer. Please note today's event will be recorded and uploaded to the AAP YouTube channel under the COMMnections playlist. During the program, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function, and we will answer as many questions as possible during the latter portion of the event. With that, I will turn over the presentation to our moderator, Dr. Patricia Hernandez, Assistant Program Director and Senior Lecturer for the Master of Arts in Communication program.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you all for joining this afternoon. We are fortunate to have Don Thompson be our guest speaker today for this webinar on analytics and talking a lot about his research. He is an accomplished, award-winning media professional, also very passionate about teaching, and we're fortunate to also have him teach at Hopkins, and he has taught at several other universities as well. And most recently, he won the 2023 UCLA Alumni Distinguished Mentor Award. So I will also let him introduce himself some more, but thank you all for joining. And we will take questions at the end, so you can write the questions in the Q&A box, and I will read them out, and Don will do his best to answer them. So thank you again, and welcome, Don.
Thank you, Dr. Hernandez. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to be giving a talk today about content analysis using automated platforms. So I'm going to go ahead and share some slides, and we'll step through the talk. Content analysis using automated platforms. My name is Don Thompson, and I'm a lecturer at the Krieger School. Happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Just a little bit about myself. I do have quite a long history in research, although I will say that my academic research is more recent because I have decided at this later stage in life to go back and get my PhD. I had studied at UCLA and received a BA and MA in film and media studies, critical studies, media studies at UCLA, and had a great time doing that, going through that program. But I always felt a desire I always had this part of me that loved academics and wanted to return to academics. So I returned to get my PhD at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and I started to pursue that in 2023. I'm currently an ABD, so I'm not quite a DR yet, but I'm getting close. While at IUP, I've worked on a couple of different studies that use NVivo software as the basis for my content analysis. And the first study I did was a study regarding the Boeing crisis of 2018 and 2019. And you probably remember the Boeing crisis where they had two incidents with airplanes in close proximity. There were quite a disaster for Boeing and a crisis. And so I did a study regarding that specific series of events. Also, more recently, I did a study regarding communication centralization at Siemens AG in Germany. And I talked a little bit about their effort to centralize their communications within that company and what kind of impact that had. And I presented this research at a variety of different conferences, most recently at the BEA in Las Vegas, where I presented the Siemens study. It was quite fun, actually. I'll share a couple of pictures. And also I've presented at the Maryland Communications Association and Research Associates of Interdisciplinary Studies at Princeton and others. So I enjoy presenting. I enjoy doing this research and presenting it. I am also a certified nerd. That's the picture of me at 10 years old that certifies me as the. Now you got to give it up for that collar. I mean, check out that collar. That's something else. I can't believe that. So that was how I started my academic career back, I don't know, but it's probably in 6th grade or so. Let's go through an overview of this talk and what I'm trying to convey here with this talk and this information. So what I want to do is I want to describe how I used some automated analysis tools, content analysis tools for my PhD program at IUP, and specifically the 2 studies that I mentioned, and how I use them to perform automated coding. And I'd like to talk about the pros and cons of this approach. I think I wouldn't be honest in saying that there weren't limitations to this approach, and that not everybody, is entirely accepting of automated platforms today. I mean, I don't think that's the case, but it's becoming more prevalent and more popular. And it certainly has assisted me in my efforts to get my PhD. And I'd also like to summarize a little bit about what the future of research coding might look like. And I'll even ask AI about that. So we'll see what AI has to say. Here's some photos from the BEA conference that I just attended in Las Vegas. And so it's a poster presentation, so it's sort of entry-level presentation at the BEA, but I was happy to get there, get it into the conference and present my research. And so you can see on the lower right-hand side there is me standing next to the poster, and this is the detail of the poster. So I'll use this as a starting point to start, to dive into, basically what I did with NVivo regarding this particular research, and also some research that I did related to Boeing that I mentioned before. So as you can see in that 3rd column over, we have results, and we have a consolidated sentiment score for this particular study. And what this study was doing was looking at the corporate communication centralization at Siemens that began in 2014. So basically they consolidated their communications division and went, it was part of an overall restructuring. So their communications division became centralized, and the director of the communications division reported directly to the CEO, and it was centralized in Germany. That had impacts overall to the company, and so I wanted to take a look at that, and that's what I did with this study. Is I took a look at some of the annual reports for the company several years in succession and did a sentiment analysis of the annual reports to see if I could find any patterns in the sentiment analysis. And NVivo is a great platform to do this kind of automated sentiment analysis and sentiment scoring. You can then work with the baseline information, and you can actually sum it up and consolidate it further, which is what I did. And then you can use that as a basis for which to do some comparisons. This is a qualitative study. Obviously it's not quantitative from the standpoint of I'm not directly correlating causation necessarily between these elements, but there are strong indicators that there's influencers, you might say. And so what I wanted to do is show that over time, and I'll get into more of that in a second, how the sentiment changed. And there were certain things that happened during the course of the evolution of this sentiment change that I think were instructional. The first time I used NVivo to perform content analysis was on the Boeing study that I mentioned before, and then I followed up with the Siemens study that I just showed for the poster presentation for, and that was again used at the BEA. The Boeing study was presented at the RACE conference in Princeton and published by the conference. It isn't published yet by a journal. I would like to see both of these studies eventually, hopefully, published in journals. I do believe they could use some refinement, but I think they're a good start in place, and I'm happy with them so far. I think they show some interesting findings. So the tool NVivo can be used for both automated or manual qualitative content analysis. It's got a great deal of flexibility there. And it can be used for both themes and sentiment. And what I want to get into is some of the pros and cons of auto coding using this kind of platform. And I'll get into some details about that in a little bit. And however, I would say that the process for using this software is quite straightforward and quite easy. That said, I do have a background in software. I actually began my career in software after studying at UCLA as a tools specialist. So I have a sort of affinity to using tools to accomplish tasks. And basically, this tool, NVivo, can be used in a way that you can more or less think of it as a research assistant. And if you've used it in the past, that's great. If you haven't, and I'm just introducing this idea to you, you might want to check it out. It can be very, very helpful in terms of helping to speed up certainly your research. This is a flow chart that shows the progression of tasks for using NVivo, the general progression. It's a little bit simplified, but more or less this is how it works. So the first thing you want to do is determine your document universe. What it is you're going to be looking at. So I like to think of it as really two sides to the process. You have what I would call the deductive side, which is getting your documents together. You might be using keywords to filter your documents. You might be somehow narrowing your document search. So with the Boeing study, I selected specific news articles over a period of time that I was interested in looking at, and then I filtered them based upon keywords. So I had a limited universe of documents that I wanted to use NVivo to analyze. And the same thing happened with the Siemens study as well. I focused on specifically on the annual reports. So it was a limited universe of documents, and I already predefined that. So you define what the document universe is that you want to analyze, and then you gather them and you import them into the tool. And then you determine, well, what level do you want to code at? Do you want to code at the sentence or the paragraph level? And there's going to be, I think for sentiment analysis, my take on it is so far, I've looked into this, is that sentence level seems to be more effective for sentiment analysis. For thematic coding, it's a little bit, more flexible. But basically for when I did my Boeing study, I still did my coding for the thematic analysis at the sentence level, not at the paragraph level. So then you want to find out, or you want to determine, basically make a decision. Do you want to do sentiment or thematic analysis? And do you want to use existing codes? So the tool, it has a great deal of flexibility. So you can actually have, let's say, for example, you have a team and you're doing coding on a project. You can have a team do some initial coding, maybe 10, 15% of coding on the project to sort of establish a baseline. And then you can have NVivo look at those existing codes and use those as a pattern, as sort of a template from which to apply the rest of its coding to. If you don't do that, it's going to basically do it itself. I mean, it's going to go through its own process. It's going to use its own internal AI to determine what the sentiment is or what the themes are. And it's impressive, I have to say. I think from a sentiment analysis standpoint, it's quite strong. From a thematic standpoint, as I'll get into in a second, it could be that human coders are going to have more nuance. They're going to have a little bit more able to place thematic coding in a little bit more context. So basically what I did is I initially used it for the Boeing study for thematic and sentiment analysis, but as I got more familiar with the software, I felt more comfortable with using it for sentiment analysis, and that's what I did with Siemens. So basically with the sentiment analysis, it comes back with a score, basically, of negative, positive, and variations of moderately negative, moderately positive, very negative, very positive, and neutral. And what I did from there is then I oftentimes what I will do is I'll sum up the output from NVivo into a higher level to see if I can find patterns. And I think this is one of the really interesting things about this kind of tool, is you can use it to survey your document, the documents that you have in front of you, and see if you can spot patterns. And sometimes you can find very interesting patterns or themes. So this is a Siemens study, and this is basically goes back to the poster presentation. This is a subset of that poster presentation. So what we have here is you can see the sentiment scores, which I consolidated them. So this is all of the various scores summed up, you might say. And then over time, beginning in 2014 up through 2021, I wanted to show and see if I could spot any patterns. And there was a pretty obvious pattern that came up. The pattern that came up was that in 2017, we have a shift. So you have negative sentiment that predominates 2014, 2015, and 2016. And then there's a shift to positive sentiment in 2017, and that positive sentiment continues through 2021. So if I looked at a variety of different aspects of what was going on at the company, including its efforts to become more sustainable, in other words, adhere to CSR, corporate social responsibility, I could start bringing some meaning to this analysis. So basically what I did, going back to the poster presentation for a second, is that I used CSR and stakeholder theory as the theoretical frameworks for this study. So I think that, when you do this kind of content analysis, and I think that most of us that have been involved in research understand this, you want to bring to bear some kind of theoretical framework to bring meaning to be able to interpret your data more effectively. So in the case of Siemens, because they were embarked on a CSR effort, I use corporate social responsibility as a theoretical framework as well as stakeholder theory, because what they were trying to do with CSR is focus on what's called the triple bottom line: people, planet, and prosperity, or profit. And I wanted to see how that tracked to these sentiment scores, if there was a shift in the company's strategy or a shift in things that were happening on the ground with the company that would affect these sentiment scores potentially. And all of this was triggered, by the way, by their restructuring in 2014. So you could say that the overarching trigger point was in 2014, the restructuring occurred. The company restructured themselves, they recalibrated towards a CSR strategy, and they focused on sustainability moving forward from 2014, 2015. A very interesting shift for the company. So this stock price really is showing you might say, the profit side of the equation for Siemens. So we can see that in addition to their positive sentiment going up in 2017 and 2021, that their stock price increased. So that's obviously good. It's continued to increase. I checked this morning, it's about $105 a share or something like that. So I think that this kind of analysis can be very informative in terms of looking at a mix of influencers and saying, okay, well, what is it? Why is it that the company, in this case, I was curious about why these sentiment shifts were occurring. So I looked at a variety of different indicators, including the stock price, including a sustainability report, which was released in 2017, which showed that the company had made substantial progress towards sustainability. Therefore, the positive trend in 2017 begins to make sense. The company is moving in a sustainable direction. It's meeting its goals related to sustainability. It's meeting its goals related to profit and people. Therefore, it's being relatively successful in its CSR strategy. I'm not saying the company is perfect or it didn't have its bumps, but certainly I think that what I found in this study, looking at Siemens, was that I believe, to me, it seems to be a good example of a long-term sustainable strategy that allows for profitability as opposed to a short-term strategy which is only looking at, for example, stock valuation. Okay, so now let's turn to the Boeing study for a second. The Boeing study was obviously looking at a completely different problem. The crisis in 2018, 2019 were related to two very, tragically, couple accidents that happened with their airplanes, very tragically, which they traced back to a specific engineering issue that was, really absolutely incredible that it happened. I have to say it was a single point of failure related to something they call the MCAS system with their 737 MAX, which has of course been fixed. But what I wanted to do with my thematic analysis using NVivo with the Boeing study is look at themes as they evolved over that specific period of time and afterwards, and to see if I could map that again to a theoretical framework. In this case, I was using Timothy Combs' situational crisis communication theory, SCCT. So I was using SCCT and image repair theory as the theoretical frameworks to take a look and interpret this data. And what I noticed is that if I looked at these themes over time, they indicated certain changes. And initially, you can see, well, a very big example is the theme of safety that comes up, and it becomes more important as this period of time progresses, and maintains a sense of importance throughout the period of analysis that I'm looking at. And initially, systems and pilots and flight and crew and data indicate a different focus than as we move forward, and safety becomes, and fixes become more important and factor in. So I wanted to take a look at Boeing's response to this crisis, how they started off with basically a sort of a denial of the crisis, and then they moved into accepting responsibility for the crisis, and ultimately a rebuild strategy that they wanted to, fix the image. They wanted to repair their image, which had been obviously, they had severe reputational damage after that crisis. So I wanted to take a look at the evolution of the themes over time and how that mapped to Timothy Combs' SCCT. Here's an example of the code book that came out of that process from NVivo. NVivo does allow you to, again, as I mentioned before, it will allow you to basically accept pre-existing code. So you could have a team that's done some coding already, and then that will be factored into its analysis when you autocode. If you don't do that, NVivo will use its own internal logic to determine what the codes are. So in this case, when I did the Boeing study, that's what I did. I let NVivo basically determine what the themes were. It does ask you up front, or tell you what its themes are going to be, and then you can pick and choose among them those that you want to detail. I just selected everything because what I was very curious about is which were the most prevalent. So that's where I ended up with this basically compilation, numerical compilation of the prevalence of those themes over that period of time. And the code book is generated, and you can use this and revise it and re-import it back into NVivo. So this can become an iterative process in terms of your coding. You can take a code book again, and you can look at it, you can analyze it, you can determine if you do or don't like some of the interpretation that it has, and you can edit it and reload it into NVivo and go through an iterative process with your coding, which could increase the quality. Let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons. So some of the pros are that this is a faster method of analysis. I have to say that it probably is, you could probably do in days what it would take weeks or perhaps months to do in a typical manual coding process. I've been trained to do manual coding. I know how to do manual coding. I'm not saying not to do manual coding, and many disciplines will adhere to manual coding, of course, to this day. But it does allow for, in specific disciplines, and perhaps communications media being a big one, will allow for a faster analysis process, that you can have a quicker turnaround, which might be important. Certainly when I'm doing my PhD program, I've got a deadline for my study, it was a good thing to be able to turn it around rather quickly. That said, there are benefits that I think are beyond that allow us to start thinking about, well, maybe this is a good model for analysis moving forward outside of the fact that it's just quick. I will say, though, that with thematic coding, not sentiment analysis, but with thematic coding, that the feedback, what I'm seeing out there, even with NVivo itself within their people, they believe that manual thematic coding is to this day going to have more nuance. It's going to be able to establish better context for your thematic analysis. But NVivo can certainly, at a minimum, be able to give you that first pass at your thematic coding, and then you can iterate it from there. But for sentiment analysis, I think that the consensus is that at the sentence level, it provides a consistent and granular sentiment analysis that can be quite effective and quite useful. And what I liked about it is that once you get a pattern established and you look at patterns, and you can, let's say, take your level of analysis up to a higher level, you might say, then you can start potentially spotting patterns in your data. And if you can spot patterns in your data, you might be able to interpret it in interesting ways. That's what I was trying to do in terms of the study at Siemens and also study at Boeing. Is I tend to like these big picture analyses. So I like to look at longer term, trends, and to see if I can spot patterns, and then to do some kind of analysis of that. And I think it's very instructional. I think that with the Boeing study and with the Siemens study, it told me a lot about how big companies can be run, should be run, and maybe shouldn't be run. So, but back to our pros and cons here. Again, I think it allows for a creative kind of interpretation of the data, in that it gives you a different level of analysis, or has the potential to give you a different level of analysis, and not necessarily mire you in the coding process itself. I'm not saying that the coding process itself can provide a way to get to a level of analysis that's rich and nuanced and great. But I do believe that also, I think complementing it with automated coding can be something to take a look at. And perhaps the future of coding will involve sort of a collaboration between the humans and the AI, so to speak. They're collaborating in the coding process to provide a richer analysis process that will leverage the strengths of AI and the strengths of human coders. I think that this is gaining more acceptance, but it's still not universally accepted. I had AI actually comment on who it thought was beginning to see more acceptance out there in terms of academics for this type of work. And believe it or not, communications media came out on top. I don't know whether it was just trying to make me happy because that's my area. I don't know. I should go out back and ask it perhaps. There are several different tools that are available for this kinds of analysis. But I would say that NVivo was ranked, and this is by AI, by the way, was ranked as being at the top. And so for auto coding, OpenAI AI was giving it a 5 stars in terms of being very advanced. And it just provides this list of what the strengths are of these various platforms. And so I have to be honest, I've used one of them, which is NVivo, but I thought it would be nice to be able to take a look at the other tools available and say, well, the world is not in this automated, coding world. NVivo is not the be all and end all. There are other tools out there, certainly. So the future of coding, according to Google AI, and of course, we got to go with it. I think future of coding and research will evolve AI-powered tools and techniques leading to increased productivity, more robust code, and focus on interdisciplinary collaboration. While AI will assist with code generation and testing, humans will still be needed for critical thinking. Thank you. We're still needed. complex problem solving and ensuring code quality, particularly in domains like personalized medicine. I have no idea why it said personalized medicine, but I figured I would leave that as a finishing point because that's what Hopkins is to a great extent about, is medicine. So I figured I'd just leave it there. And perhaps somebody on the call will be able to chime in with their opinion on that. So that's my talk. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed presenting this information. Now we can open up for Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Yes, if anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the Q&A or the chat box, and Don will be happy to answer them. Don, for people that might be interested in doing content analysis and maybe just starting out, I guess, what would be your best piece of advice for them?
Well, I think that, just to experiment, that would be my advice to, if they have a study that they're interested in doing, that they believe that this kind of tool might be able to be useful in that process, then I would, go out and do a trial of this or another tool, and play around with it and see what they can discover. I think that the greatest thing for me is that it allows for, to me, because I, in a sense, because I have just gone back to do my PhD, I sort of don't have a preconception related to what I can and can't do with it. And I have a tools background from my software background as well. So I didn't really have a preconception so much in terms of what I could and could not. I may not be using I'm not using it outside the bounds of what would be expected, but some of the consolidation of the data to sum it up, to roll it up, to see patterns, I think is an example of being creative with this kind of tool. You don't have to be, necessarily, you don't have to limit yourself to what the advertised uses are. You can think out of the box, so to speak. So that's what I was trying to allude to when, in terms of looking at another level of analysis, which to me, that's what to me was very interesting about the tool, was it allowed for that, potentially at least, for that kind of analysis where you're not just saying, okay, well, give me the sentiment score for this report. You could look at a series of reports and see if you can spot patterns, sort of doing a meta-analysis in a way.
Right. Great, thank you. All right, we have a question. Does NVivo, excuse me, work on only textual analysis? For example, could data in form of a spreadsheet be analyzed?
You can use other artifacts. I've done textual analysis with the tool, so there may be limitations there, but you can code other artifacts certainly. But I think that would what I've done with it is basically you might call it inductive textual analysis. So again, the texts have been annual reports, the texts have been newspaper articles and that type of thing. I've seen people use it for social media. So I've seen people use it for Twitter. I've seen people use it for other kinds of social media. So I think that, you could get creative with it, and I don't want to sort of prejudge it. You might look at it and discover that indeed you can, there's no real limitation. But I would need to look it up, basically what I'm saying, but I know for sure textual analysis is okay. And I have seen it used for other social media types of analysis.
Great, thank you. And then another question is, does it work on quantitative content analysis or content on social media, which you just answered, kind of? Yeah,
it's really a qualitative tool. So what I would like to do, it's a great question though, because I think that some of what I've been doing has sort of sparked me to think about, well, how could you take this a step further on the quantitative side? So, for example, with looking at the Siemens data, you have a potential for a correlation between sentiment and stock price. there's a potential there. I think that, but you need to run the numbers, really. You need to do some kind of a correlation analysis to ensure that, you actually had a statistical, there was some kind of goodness of fit, you might say. So that can be done. That's actually in my mind in terms of a next step with a Siemens study, is to do some kind of a quantitative follow-up to it. But I would not use NVivo. I would use SPSS and so on.
All right. And then does it work well in languages other than English?
Great question. I only worked in English. I did not try any other languages outside of English, but it may support other languages. But that shows a bias right there, my English-focused bias. I'm sorry about that. I'm not a product salesperson. I don't know all the features.
Yeah.
I sort of narrow focus, so sorry about that.
That's good. All right, we have another one. As an example, collecting employee surveys on a specific topic and collecting textual open-ended responses would end up in a spreadsheet instead of analyzing that manually. Would NVivo be able to qualitatively analyze that data?
Yes, as long as it's textual, you'll be able to upload it and apply the process to it. So there shouldn't be any problem there.
Excellent.
So it just considers it text.
Do we have any other questions or comments? All right. Well, I don't see any other questions. So Don, I really appreciate Yep. Thank you. Carrie says thank you. Really appreciate your time in sharing your research experience with us today, and appreciate everyone that was able to make it today. Thank you all for joining, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day or night, wherever you are in the world.